Eagles, Packers, a giant NFC showdown to kick off the season in Brazil. Who wins it? Crossover Thursday coming up next.
You are Locked On NFL Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Eagles fans, Packers fans, welcome into Crossover Thursday on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Louis DiBiase, host of the Locked On Eagles podcast, joined by Peter Bukowski of the Locked On Packers podcast. Crossover Thursday is presented by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Use our code in all lowercase, LockedOnNFL, to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Coming up on today's loaded show, biggest storylines for the Eagles and the Packers heading into a giant showdown week 1 in Brazil, plus keys to victory for both sides and predictions. Peter, what's going on, man? This is a big game. Like, it's week 1, it's the season opener, but this could have massive implications on the NFC outlook for the postseason. It's crazy to say that, but it's true.
No, this feels like one of those games where, you know, the Thursday night game, Ravens Chiefs, like everyone's really excited about that. That's going to have that could be an AFC title game preview, all that stuff. It's an AFC title game rematch. I mean, Packers Eagles could be the same sort of thing in the NFC, and like I don't, it's not getting the same sort of buzz that Chiefs Ravens is, probably because Chiefs Ravens is first, and that's fine. But this is a game where I think these are two teams eager to show that the end of last year is not representative of who they are in different kinds of ways, right? The Packers are trying to say, look, we went toe-to-toe with the San Francisco 49ers, with the team that really like should have lost the next week, but also had a good chance to beat the Kansas City Chiefs, probably the best chance a team has had, well, I guess since the Eagles blew it. And so this is a team that really wants to show, hey, we belong. And if you're the Eagles, you're going, okay, the way that the season ended from 10-1 to what, 11-7, like that collapse down the stretch. I compared it. I'm sorry, Eagles fans, in a piece that I wrote for The Leap, I compared it to, I said it was the worst collapse in the regular season since anything New York Mets related.
I said it was for a contender, the worst collapse in NFL. I can't think of another collapse like that from a contender.
It's pretty brutal to go down the way that they did against Baker Mayfield and the Bucs, like that even made it worse. And so I think there's a lot to prove here for both of these teams. And a lot of new, right? Like both teams have new defensive coordinators. And that's going to be a big story on Friday. What does it look like? Well, for the Eagles, you're not changing a ton, right? You're going from a Fangio tree kind of system to Vic Fangio, right? And Matt LaFleur pointed out, it's one thing to run a Fangio system, and it's another thing to have Vic Fangio. He is one of the most respected defensive coordinators, defensive coaches, defensive minds in the game today. And there's a reason that when Matt LaFleur was looking for a defensive coordinator the last time around, he hired Joe Barry to run Brandon Staley's defense, which is a version of the Vic Fangio tree. Interestingly, though, Jeff Hafley, very much not a Fangio disciple. Despite the fact that he was a 49ers coach, he's on the solid tree. That is really Seahawks DNA. That's single high, that's cover 3, and Hafley has put his own spin on it. He wants to play a way, Louis, that like no one else in the league really wants to play right now. He is a single high guy, but not in a Gus Bradley single high kind of way. It is single high, it is man coverage, and we will blitz the daylights out of you. At least that was the Boston College MO.
Yeah, I like that kind of defense, and I think it's going to be a fun back and forth battle. And you're right, Peter, I think you look at both teams, the season they had last year, it was the tale of two halves. The Packers are trying to prove the second half wasn't a fluke, and the Eagles are trying to prove the first half of the year wasn't a fluke, because the Eagles were, again, 11-1, and it wasn't just that they were beating bad teams. They had they went on a run in November and December where they took down Miami, Dallas, Buffalo, Kansas City. Like, it wasn't that hard, or I should say it wasn't that easy. So that's going to be the curious part, is which
that Bills game was an awesome game too.
Yeah, it was one of the games of the year, if not the game of the year. So I think both teams are trying to prove that one half of last year is correct. And interestingly enough, Peter, too, these are two of the youngest teams in football.
Yeah.
The Packers have the youngest team from average starters, and the Eagles are third. So I wouldn't say they're inexperienced, but like, these teams aren't going away in this conference anytime soon.
I was surprised when I saw that stat the other day that the Eagles were as young as they were, because you think about Brandon Graham and Kelsey moving on, obviously. So now you have to get some new guys in there. But as I went up and down the roster, I was like, okay, yeah, Darius Slay getting older, of course, but they've injected a lot of youth in a lot of these places. And that's actually why I think this is going to be a really interesting test, because I've heard a lot, and I mentioned this. I don't want to preempt too much of our conversation, coming up, but I feel like if you're the Packers, what you want to show, I'll phrase it this way, is you want to show you are every bit as talented as people think the Eagles, the 49ers, and the Lions
Sure.
are. Whether or not those teams are actually that talented, we will see. Whether or not the questions that we have about those teams are as glaring or as important as what the Packers have. But this is their opportunity to go, look, yeah, we beat the Cowboys. There's been a lot of hand waving of that Cowboys game for reasons that I don't quite understand. Like, I understand Dak Prescott has not won a lot of big games. Mike McCarthy has a Super Bowl. They won 12 games. Like, they've won 36 games in the regular season over the last 3 years. And the Packers went to Dallas and dismantled that football team. Like,
oh yeah,
you have to respect, and then went for 55 minutes, outplayed the San Francisco 49ers. I know the Lions did the same thing, but like, this is their chance to show that was not a fluke. This is Jordan Love's chance to show that second half is not a fluke. And, I think for a lot of these veteran players on defense, especially, Jair Alexander's going, hey, don't forget, I'm one of the best corners in the league. Rashawn Gary and Kenny Clark have a chance to be unleashed in this defense. And so there's a lot on the line, a lot of new things on both sides, which is what makes this so fun, right, Lou? Like, we have teams that we know really what the commensurate parts are, but they're going to be deployed in very disparate ways this year, at least on defense for the Packers. For the Eagles, it's all over. And for me, when I think about, how this all fits together at the end, I'm looking at the continuity that the Packers have. And I think if you're Green Bay, you have to hope that the travel and all that stuff. The Packers, by the way, did not want to play this game in Brazil. And I bet
the Eagles did either, by the way.
No, you got to give up a home game.
Team. Yeah.
You wouldn't want to do that. So I think the continuity, that could end up being the key to this. Just like, okay, it's week 1, and we might look back at this game in a month, in 6 weeks, and go, it's not really representative of who the Eagles are. Week 1 can be weird like that. I just think it's going to take them time. I think it's going to take the Packers defense some time too. So that's the part. It's like, who can get in it faster? Who can acclimatize faster to what they're doing? That might ultimately be the thing here.
Yeah, and Peter, we're going to have predictions later on the show, but that's why I'm struggling so much to get a gauge on this game, is week 1's weird enough. These teams last year were so Jekyll and Hyde the first and second half. Like you mentioned, they have new coordinators. And by the way, it's in a totally different continent. So that travel, it's going to play a part, especially for the Eagles who are losing a home game. So it's very hard to grasp, like, who is the favorite in this matchup.
Yeah, and if you look at all the models that are out there, the index models and the point-based models and the betting models and all those things, they have this game as a pick. And so it's interesting that this is where we are. The only other thing, like, storyline wise, that I wanted to talk to you about is, you mentioned this is a Philly home game. They did the survey in Brazil, and the Packers, not the majority of fans, but the plurality of fans, more Brazilian football fans are Packers fans than any other kind of team. I spoke to a Brazilian journalist the other day, and he said he thinks it's going to be like 75-25 Packers fans at the stadium. But, and this is interesting, because they're not, like, they don't have football there, like American football there regularly or ever. They might not know, like, hey, when the offense is on the field, be quiet. Like, it may be one of those things where the Packers and the Eagles are each going to have silent counts at some points in the game.
There might not be any sort of home field advantage.
Right, exactly. That it may just be this raucous atmosphere that you just have to sort of muddle your way through. And I think in a lot of ways that could just make it really fun. Like, the soccer crowds are great. They're just like, they're pitched at a 10 the whole game. And if that's what we get in prime time to open the season with two NFC contenders, like, sign me up. Let's go. I'm ready. Give me a mouthpiece. And let's go. Let's do it.
No, I totally agree. I think this is going to be a great matchup. We're going to continue to get into matchups, storylines, keys to victory, and more coming your way right here on this Crossover Thursday edition of Locked On Eagles and Locked On Packers. Locked On Eagles, Locked On Packers. We are sponsored today by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. PrizePicks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Unlike other apps on PrizePicks, it's just you against the numbers. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 players, stat projections, and watch the winnings roll in. One Jalen Hurts yard actually means one win on PrizePicks every week in September. That's right. Only 1 yard gets you an automatic win every football weekend in September. 4 weeks of free W's. Don't miss this deal in PrizePicks because it's gone when September ends. PrizePicks is the best way to get action on sports in most states, including California, Texas, and Georgia. I'm thinking the one bet I'm going to ride with, one pick for sure, the Goblin pick. A.J. Brown over 49.5 receiving yards. It's a tough matchup when Jair Alexander is on him, but A.J. Brown last year had over 50 receiving yards in 13 of 17 games. Download the PrizePicks app today. Use our code LOCKEDONNFL and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code LOCKEDONNFL on PrizePicks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. PrizePicks. Run your game. Thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles and Locked On Packers your first listen each and every day. Guys, make sure the new Locked On NFL is your second listen. Locked On NFL is now 2 shows every single day. First, the madman Tyler Rowland kicks off your morning with a double shot of NFL espresso, and then stop by the barbershop with Tony Wiggins for some real NFL talk. Add in the Locked On local experts, and you get unprecedented NFL insight, hot opinions, detailed breakdowns, all in just 30 minutes. It's the new Locked On NFL, and it's twice a day. Make the madman Tyler Rowland and the barber Tony Wiggins your second listen at the new Locked On NFL on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. Yeah, so Peter, there's a lot of storylines. We were already getting into them. I feel like for the Eagles, there's so much change that we know is in place on both sides. Like brand new coordinators, Kellen Moore, Vic Fangio. Your offense, the core is still intact. They're all locked up and established. But on defense, it's so young. Like you mentioned, you were surprised by why the Eagles are so young, the third youngest team in the league. It's because it's pretty much all like first, second, third year guys. And Howie Roseman finally, he doesn't really do this often, but he finally said, like, we need to see through the long-term investments, and it's sink or swim time. Do we know Nolan Smith's going to be established and be a contender, or I should say a reliable pass rusher on the edge? Jordan Davis, do we know he's going to be more than a nose stop, run stopping, 1 or 2 down kind of player? That is he going to rush the passer? We're not sure. And so is Nakobe Dean going to finally be an every down linebacker? But Howie said, I've invested so much from the draft in these players that we've got to see it through. And it's a tough matchup because the Packers are young on offense, but they're deep and they're very multiple when it comes to the positions and what they can run.
Yeah. And this is something that I've been talking about all week. And I did a stream yesterday, and I was like, the thing about this is I've never, this is not, Eagles fans will get mad, but I've just kind of never seen it with Kellen Moore. I've never seen and I'm not saying he's a bad coach. What I'm saying is I've never seen the Wunderkind tag that he has at times had over his career, where okay, after, they had, Dallas had that really, really good 2021 season. And it was like, okay, maybe he's actually the next head coach of the Cowboys. And then in 2022, it wasn't quite as cute. And so then he moves on. He goes to the Chargers. I don't know about you, but I was not particularly impressed with anything that happened in Los Angeles that year. Now, maybe that's just Brandon Staley's stink, and we can't really talk about that. But what do you think like the biggest change is going to be? Because I look at what I saw last year. This was still in the aggregate a good offense. I don't think it was the worst managed offense in the league. So like, what is the step up from Brian Johnson to Kellen Moore? What is it that you are hoping to see change?
I just think they need to be less predictable. And I actually like what you said. I don't think Eagles fans will be upset by that take. I don't think anybody said when Kellen Moore was hired that, here's this new guy from the Sean McVay or Kyle Shanahan coaching tree. Yeah. He's going to replace Nick Sirianni in 2025. I think what Kellen Moore represents is just a philosophical change the Eagles had to have, where he presents more pre-snap motion. He's going to put more, I should say, responsibilities on Jalen Hurts when it comes to multiple reads. Like he's not, for the blitz, they're going to finally have hot reads and answers that aren't just Jalen Hurts pulling a rabbit out of a hat. So I think it's more Kellen Moore's philosophies that people are buying into or are excited about, and it's not Kellen Moore himself. At least that's my perspective. I don't know how fans feel, but I think they needed to become more multiple, Peter, because last year, yes, you look at the numbers, they weren't a bad offense for the majority of the year, but they were relying solely on elite talent on the offensive line, receivers, Jalen Hurts. The coaches did not bail out that team ever. And that's the thing, like the coaches never elevated that talent. They're already elite, but like the system never made it easy on them. And I think once, Jalen Hurts' confidence was shot, once Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown got banged up at the end of the year, they had no answers, and that was glaring.
Yeah, I was looking at it, and they were 10th in DVOA last year, 12th in weighted DVOA, but they had the best offensive line in the league. If not the best 1-2 receiver punch, like a top 3, 1-2
top 3
group.
at least, yeah.
You have a quarterback that is really highly regarded. I still kind of don't know what to make of Jalen Hurts. You and I have talked about this. We talked about this on Locked On Sports today, and I've talked about it with Gino as well.
Yeah,
I kind of still don't know what to make of Jalen Hurts, and maybe that's my failing. It is just one of those things, right? I don't know what to do with him. But I increasingly find myself feeling that way about like Joe Burrow too. So, and Lamar Jackson. I just talked to Kevin Ostreicher for Locked On Sports today, and I'm just sort of like, what do I do with Lamar Jackson? Like, they can't win in the playoffs, but he's been an MVP twice, and I think he's awesome. So I don't know what to do with him. And I guess it's just the unbearable standard of Patrick Mahomes, where it's like, okay, no one is Mahomes, and so what do we make of everybody else? Like, that's the thing here. And so what struck me about Philly last year, they had all this talent, 10th in DVOA. So like, that should not be the case. Like, this should have been one of the 3 or 4 best offenses in football. And I just like, what is Shane Steichen just that good a coach? Like, is that where we landed?
It's maybe a little of that, and I think Nick Sirianni, unfortunately, might have been that bad of a game planner on offense. And I think it's why they took responsibilities away from him almost completely. And yeah, Brian Johnson had a lot to do with it. He was the play caller.
Love that. We're going to keep you, but like, please don't touch anything.
It's an awkward thing, at least in my opinion. The vibes seem to be good right now, but my issue with that, Peter, always, and it's why I respect the Packers so much, and I love the setup they have with LaFleur and Jordan Love, is if your head coach isn't the play caller, or at least the head of the offense, for me, every year, like, there's going to be, that continuity is going to be lacking. Because let's say Kellen Moore, they ball out this year, he might get a head coaching job next year. And if they're terrible, he might get fired. And every year, that could be the situation. And that's why I always wanted, and that's what Nick Sirianni was hired to be, was the head of the offense. So at least that's where I'm at. And I that's why I like the Packers setup more than the Eagles from a coaching perspective.
Well, and the question, I think, in this game is how fast can you make those changes? Like, okay, you're going to install, concepts that can attack more of the intermediate part of the field, which they could not do at all last year. It was like, if you're not hitting a deep shot or some sort of underneath catch and run, you just don't have an offense. And okay, so I think Kellen Moore can do that. That is part of what he does well. But you have to have answers versus the blitz. Jeff Hafley, one of the most blitz happy.
I was going to say, he's an attacker, right? It sounds like it.
Yeah, in college football, even without great talent, he's like, we're gonna send. I think no one, but certainly top 5 in terms of blitz rate on third down and in the red zone in 6-man pressures and 0 pressures. Like, he is going to come after Jalen Hurts, and so he's going to test this. He's going to test this offense.
This is a great first test. Like, let's say if they fix their problems from last year, like, it's here it is in Brazil,
exactly
right away.
Exactly right. The last thing before we get to keys to victory.
Yeah.
I have to ask you about this, because I wrote about this earlier in the week at The Leap, a newsletter I would love for everyone to subscribe to. Is I think there is genuinely a lot of pressure on Philadelphia. Maybe not to win necessarily, but to look good, to look like we've solved some of these problems. Like, it might just be that the Packers are really good, and in 6 weeks, if the Packers win, I'm not going to take that as a given, but let's just say if the Packers win, in 6 weeks, we might go, okay, well, they might just be the best team in the league, or they might just be the best or second best team in the NFC. And so it's fine. If you lose 27-24 or 35-31 or whatever, it's fine.
Yeah.
But it seems to me there's a lot of pressure on this team to show there's a step, there's a change that's been made here. And if they don't, I would worry about that. And the psyche of this team after all the changes that were made, to just go, we were so close, and did we just miss our chance? And now in the offseason, like, if the season doesn't go the right way, do you have to replace Nick Sirianni? And then what happens to Vic Fangio and Kellen Moore? And then you sort of spiral into this dark place.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of pressure on this team, and it's very reminiscent to 2020, where they made change, but they knew the window was open, and they had, I don't want to say this is one last shot because the core is in place, it feels like on both sides. But yeah, there's a lot of pressure on this team in this first game to show that that second half of the year was a fluke, and their window has been open longer. So there is more pressure just naturally. The Packers are so young, and they weren't even really expected to be there last year. So I think too for their psyche, Peter, because that was such a massive part of why they collapsed last year was a confidence thing. And in the locker room, the fingers started to be pointed. So the vibes they're right now they're high, but I do wonder like if they start to struggle, where will that be at? So they need to start this thing off on the right foot. They've never lost in the Jalen Hurts, Nick Sirianni era. Week 1, I think it's more important now than ever to get that first win.
Yeah, I mean it's the kind of thing where I don't want to make excuses preemptively. Philly fans will immediately jump on me for saying like, "Oh, the Packers can lose." I think the Packers want to win. Like, let's not get that twisted. I just think there is a different level of pressure. The Packers were 2-5.
No, I agree. I think Eagles fans would agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I just think it's a different set of circumstances. And I'll be interested to see how this is all going to shake out. Let's break down the matchups. Let's figure out how we're going to figure out what's going to happen here on Friday night. Let's do that.
Crossover Thursday is sponsored by LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you got to check out LinkedIn Jobs. They have the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just a job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses, they get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions do apply. Crossover Thursday, Locked On Eagles and Locked On Packers, brought to you by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Use the code in all lowercase LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Matchups for Eagles, Packers, and Brazil. And Peter, I think there is a lot of good ones on both sides of the ball. But for the Packers, like, what's the number one key to victory? What's the one matchup they have to make sure they win?
I think this is really the contain players for the Packers versus Jalen Hurts. In 2022, Jalen Hurts ran for over 100 yards on the Packers, and most of it was not in the designed run game. Most of it was it's third down or it's second and long. Yep. The Packers are playing man coverage. They're turning their back to the quarterback, and Jalen just takes off. And it's 4-man rush or whatever it was. And that just can't be what happens in this game if you're the Packers. You can't give this offense free yards because they're too good at the skill positions. They're too good in the run game with Saquon Barkley in this offensive line. We assume, right? The yards before contact, like DeAndre Swift had some preposterous yards before contact numbers last year. This offensive line, even without Jason Kelce, is going to be pretty good, right? So you have the guys on the outside that you know are going to win matchups. You know A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith are just going to make some plays. It can't be that everyone's covered and he just took off and made the play. So you can't let Jalen Hurts beat you with his legs. It's a close cousin to what I said earlier in the week, that the key to this game is tackling. Like A.J. Brown, one of the toughest receivers to tackle in the league. Saquon Barkley, at times in his career, one of the most difficult running backs to tackle in the league. The Packers could not tackle him last year against the Giants, or in London 2 years ago. So, okay. And Jalen Hurts, we know, is a problem in the open field. So that's the key to me. Is it's sort of like the Packers defenders versus Eagles ball carriers, but that's too broad. So like, we'll do the contain thing, because I think that's really the key here. Make Jalen Hurts beat them from the pocket. And I think that's where you're going to have your success defensively.
I think the Eagles' first key to victory, too, is also from a rushing perspective. It was a talk about Jekyll and Hyde last year. Like, the run defense perfectly represents the season the Eagles had. The first half of the year, they were a top 3 rushing defense. And then the second half of the year, Peter, they were a bottom 3 unit. Yeah. And a lot of that was Jordan Davis. Yeah, they're the anchor. Jordan Davis is the anchor of that run defense. And if Vic Fangio wants to run a lot of DB-heavy looks, he wants to do lighter boxes. where Nolan Smith, Jalix Hunt, maybe even Bryce Huff's dropping back in coverage at times, Jordan Davis has to eat up a lot of space. I think the key to this game is containing the Packers' new top running back in Josh Jacobs. Like, that was a massive problem for the Eagles last year. And then if Jacobs gets going, then here comes the play action. Jordan Love can get on the move. And there are so many young pass catchers the Packers have that the Eagles have to worry about with a brand new secondary. So make it easier on all these young players on the second and third level and take Josh Jacobs out of this game.
One thing that I think the Packers can do, and it's something that I haven't really talked a lot about, but it was a conclusion that I came to as we were getting ready for the show and I was prepping for it was, okay, Jordan Davis, part of the problem is he just can't play a lot of snaps. He's kind of just too big for that. And on the edge, the Eagles are kind of small. It's with Nolan Smith and even Bryce Huff, who is, 6'3", 255 is not, really small, especially in a 3-4. Josh Sweat is a powerful dude, 6'5", 265. Like, that's a big guy. But I think if the Packers can run a lot of plays, like go quickly, go some tempo, and force Jordan Davis to stay on the field, force Bryce Huff, who has never been a full-time football player, to stay on the field. I think that that's the kind of thing that you can wear this team down. It's week 1. You're going to be gassed anyway. Like, this is, you guys, be prepared. The second quarter of this football game is going to be ugly. It always is. Like, everyone's geeked up for that first quarter, but like the second half of the first quarter into the beginning of the second quarter, it's always the ugliest part of any week 1 because you're like, okay, we haven't done this in 9 months and I'm going to die. And so that's when maybe not the first drive, maybe not the second drive, but that like third, fourth drive, you go up tempo and you try and keep those guys on the field and you try and like run it down their throats. I was joking with Kevin Ostreicher, like that last preseason game for the Packers, they said, we're going to come out and we're just going to bully this Ravens team. And I know it's second and third stringers, but they came out and they ran the ball down those dudes' throat. And it was an assertion of dominance. It was an indication of intent. This is what we're going to do, and you can't stop us. I think the Packers have to have a couple drives like that where they're just like, this is what we're going to do, and we know you can't stop us. And maybe that seems silly because it's like, yes, have 3 or 4 really good drives, and you'll probably win a football game. But you know what I mean? Like, it is a signal of intent kind of thing where you are dictating terms. And I think that can be the difference for them.
I think also you got to look at through the air. The Eagles have so many weapons, and they're going to want to use Brown, Smith, Goddard, Saquon in the passing game, Jahan Dotson now they just traded for. But I think, we talked a lot about the running game, but for the Eagles on offense too, like staying balanced is so important. And Kellen Moore is a pass-heavy coordinator and play caller, and I think that's going to be their bread and butter. But Jalen Hurts, this offensive line, like they get into a rhythm so well in the run game, and it just makes everything else so easy. And I don't think Jalen Hurts is ever the kind of guy that's going to drop back and be comfortable 50 times a game, and every time the defense knows it's coming and still have success. Like, I think he can be that player, but they operate better as a balanced attack. And I think with Saquon Barkley, this is the best offensive line he's ever been behind.
Oh, by far.
And it's a good Packers front for sure. I think the key is like those 2 new starters. Cam Jurgens at center. He was a right guard last year, but this is the first time he's at the center spot. Mekhi Becton, brand new to the right guard position. Can they contain like Kenny Clark? That's a huge matchup in this game.
And it's not just Kenny Clark either. It's Devontae Wyatt. It's Carl Brooks. Like, they can cycle through these interior guys who can create problems
too.
And so, you got to be ready for that. Last thing I want to say here is I've been saying this all week. I'm fascinated to get your input on this. Yeah. So the Packers, I kind of feel like the way to play this Eagles team is to do kind of what Joe Barry would like to do and didn't do in 2022 for whatever reason. It's play 2 deep safeties, make them matriculate the ball down the field, no big plays, and just say at some point you guys are going to screw up. Whereas what Jeff Hafley wants to do is play single high, invite you to take your shots along the sidelines, blitz you, which I do think favors the Packers in that way. But still, I wonder if we're going to see the Packers play in a way in this game that we won't see them play the rest of the year, precisely because the best thing the Eagles offense does is throw one-on-one balls on the sidelines to these pass catchers and sort of like, okay, do you really want to invite them to do that? Like, you feel good about Eric Stokes and Jerry Alexander, but come on now. And so that cat and mouse game, what are you willing to give up? If you're also able to do, that's what makes this so fascinating. If we're going to blitz, We're gonna do it from single high. That might be what Jeff Hafley is saying. But we're also willing to give up this other thing because we think we can create negatives. Like that risk reward, that could make this game fireworks, man.
And I think you can say that about both sides. Both teams are so multiple that it's like, yeah, if we drop 2 back, but the Eagles can just take what you're giving them and run it down your throats all game.
Right.
You can't do that for 4 quarters. But if you do stack the box, and like you're saying, come at Hurts, if they have answers, they're one of the best deep passing teams in the league. So I think the key for both sides is just like committing to what the defense is giving you, right? I think that's going to be so important. All right, Peter, before we wrap things up on Crossover Thursday, it is time for predictions. Right now, the Eagles, they're at -2.5 in this one. It's an interesting line. What are you feeling about that?
I don't understand it. I have never understood it. I think these teams are pretty even. I understand if it were in Philly, it being Eagles 2.5, it's not. I think this is going to be a partisan Packers crowd. And I think I mentioned this at the top, Lou. I think the key is continuity. I think the Packers have a little more continuity than Philadelphia. I think it's a game that in week 1 could look very different in week 18, in week 19, let's say, which is a game that we could see, right? Or week 20 in the playoffs. So I think the Packers are going to win. I think it's going to be a close game. I think it's going to be a great, fun game. And I think it is going to be fireworks. I do think Jeff Hafley is going to dictate terms. I think it's going to be an aggressive performance. And I think it's going to be, again, a signal of intent. Hey, we know this is what they do well. We don't care. We're going to come after Jalen Hurts. We're going to play press man coverage. We're going to attack. We're going to solve our problems with violence and go from there. And so, look, would it surprise me if the Eagles won? No, it wouldn't. But I just think that the continuity gap for me is enough to say I think the Packers are going to be more ready to play a game with these stakes against a good team than Philly in week 1.
Yeah, I think this is a pick'em game. I think it is a toss-up, and you could make the argument for both teams. I do kind of like the Eagles matchup. If the Packers are going to attack them, this gives me the vibes of Jalen Hurts saying, I've figured this out. Kellen Moore has figured out this blitz. I think though, no matter what, it's going to be a 1-possession game. Like, I don't know why, but like the score like 23-20 is kind of in my head, something like that. You mentioned even in the second half, it could get ugly. I think that's something to expect on Friday. Yeah. But overall, it's going to be a great matchup, man. I can't wait.
I think more like 31-28. Like I think there's going to be points in this game. I think there's going to be a lot of points because I do think this Packers defense is going to be variable. Like I wouldn't be surprised if they got, a couple sacks, maybe an interception, but also gave up, like 2 60-yard touchdowns. Like I think it's going to be that kind of thing. And look, they're going to play defense the way that like you and I want a team to play defense, or a lot of fans want them to play defense. In fact, in a lot of ways that like Jim Schwartz used to play defense.
Oh yeah.
That's why this is going to be a lot of fun. I can't wait for it. And maybe Lou, you and I get to do this again in January. That would be a lot of fun.
Let's see. I hope so for sure. Thanks everybody for tuning into Crossover Thursday. Thanks for making Locked On Eagles and Locked On Packers your first listen each and every day. Make sure your second listen is the new Locked On NFL, 2 shows every day with Tyler Rowland and Tony Wiggins, breaking down everything across the NFL each and every day in just 30 minutes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. For Peter Bukowski, I'm Lou DiBiase signing off. Enjoy the game on Friday and have a great rest of your night.